Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third webinar in this exciting monthly series of the local and regional foods, resources, and research webinars, which highlights uh, the regional food research projects, resources, partnerships, and programs. We're thrilled to have you here with us today. We'll be learning about the key findings from the Consumer Food Insight series. The objectives of today's webinar are to review how food purchasing patterns have changed since the pandemic. We'll be discussing drivers of local and regional consumer purchases with a focus on regional opportunities, and hear highlights of key takeaways for food businesses. Today, we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers who are eager to share their insights and expertise with you. Before we dive in, if you'd like to ask questions, the chat is open and you can drop them in there. Today's webinar will be recorded, so you'll receive an email of today's meeting recording and notes afterwards, just as we have done for previous webinars. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Dawn Thilmany to do introductions of her team and get us started. My name is Brittany Eccles, and I'm an agricultural marketing specialist here at AMS in the local regional foods division. I've got my two colleagues here as well, Lacey Stevens and Samantha Shopstall, who will also be talking. Sorry, back to you, Dr. Thilmany.
Yeah, well, we're so glad to see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces today. I am Dawn Thilmany, and I have been a part of a team working with the Ag Marketing Service and a cooperative agreement since 2020 now. So this is feeling like old home day whenever we have these webinars. But joining me today to do what we think will be the last of our series of webinars is Jairus Rossi, also someone who's been with us from the start, Mackenzie Gill, who's been kind of our data queen on this and with us for over 3 years. And then the newest member of our team, Jayna Mallon. And in cooperation with the USDA folks you'll hear frame that project for today, we'll be presenting some of the most recent findings we put together, which are regionally focused from the most recent 2023 survey. And so we'll be back to you in a bit to share some of what we've learned, but we're very excited to also answer your questions, so don't be shy. Back to you, Lacey.
Thanks, Dawn. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And we want to send a big thank you to our partners there at Colorado State University and University of Kentucky, not only for being with us here today, but for their ongoing partnership over the past 4 years. As Dawn mentioned, this consumer food insights work that they'll be speaking today is just one component of a much larger, more expansive project called the Local and Regional Food Systems Response to COVID, which is a cooperative agreement between USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, Colorado State University, and the University of Kentucky. So over the past 4 years, over 50 individuals and a dozen organizational partners have come together in this collaborative project to translate lessons learned from local food system stakeholders during the COVID-19 pandemic and the simultaneous social crisis into specific long-term collaborative strategies for fostering recovery and equitable approaches to resilience in local and regional food systems. Next slide, please. And this is an overview just by the numbers of the many partners, components, and accomplishments of this project. For example, if you joined us last month, you heard about the Local and Regional Food Systems Resilience Playbook, another product of this collaborative work. And we'll be sure to send out links to explore the many other resources, including innovation briefs, dozens of sector snapshots, even a local food data warehouse, and dozens of tools aggregated and developed through this project in our follow-up to the webinar. But for now, let's turn it back to our speakers to learn about the Consumer Food Insight Survey, a really exciting long-term component of this project together. So back to you, Dawn, Jairus, Mackenzie, and Jayna.
Thanks so much, Lacey. So yeah, we're really excited to be here today to talk to you about some of these findings from our most recent survey. So this survey is the third iteration of the Consumer Food Insight Survey that we ran. And our most recent iteration, we collected data from around 4,500 households in January of this year. And this iteration of the survey, we wanted to focus on how consumers have changed their food shopping habits in the current post-pandemic food environment. And in particular, given the new efforts of the USDA Regional Food Business Centers, we wanted to be able to yield insights on how these consumers' choices might vary across US regions and different community sizes. So just to give you a high-level overview, our first iteration of the survey happened soon after the onset of the pandemic, and we wanted to understand how consumers' food shopping habits had shifted in the wake of COVID-19 lockdowns and fears about food availability and food supply and supply chain shocks, etc. Our second iteration of the survey wanted to understand how consumers were responding to changes in food policy and changes in COVID-19 policies, such as mask mandates and vaccination rollouts that led to the reopening of the economy and another change in the food environment. And then now, this most recent iteration is trying to understand how in the post-pandemic era, consumers might be either having their habits that they established during the pandemic persist, or if they're returning back to normal, and also understanding these in the context of rising food prices that have happened recently. So as I mentioned, we collected data from around 4,500 households of the US. These households were representative of the US population based on age, gender, and race and ethnicity. This is where our sample was located. And so you can see it's very representative of where the US population is also located. And we were pretty happy with the distribution across households in metro areas that were large, greater than 1 million, metro areas that were less than 1 million, as well as non-metro areas. So this was a breakdown of some of our demographics. As I mentioned, we asked for our sample to be representative based on gender, race and ethnicity, and income. We also saw that of our sample, the average household size was about 2.67, and around a quarter of our sample had a child under 18 at home. So we had, again, a sample that was representative of race and ethnicity, and we can also see the breakout of those respondents that identified as Hispanic, Latino, or of Spanish origin. And of those respondents, which were about 10.1%, the majority were Mexican or primarily Mexican. We also had a large representation from Puerto Rican and Cuban, as well as other Hispanic respondents. Okay, and with that, I will hand it back to Dawn for just a few slides.
Yeah, so one thing that's unique about our survey was because the Ag Marketing Service at the first onset of COVID was most interested in how various markets they supported were being affected. Instead of focusing on specific food products, we instead focused on different marketplaces. So when we decided how to disentangle that, we followed a lot of how the government generally tracks our food expenditures, which is the food we buy to eat at home versus that food away from home, although that area has become grayer and grayer as we've seen delivery services and online grow. But also we did focus a little bit on food acquisition, which we won't talk about as much today. But again, if you visit the website, you'll see more on those foods as well. Next slide. But one thing we wanted to do to kind of set the stage for this is there was a large set of dynamics happening and still happening in the retail food landscape that's important to understand. Because food away from home shut down for so long, the pandemic really drove record supermarket sales because the one choice people still had is to cook at home. But it also really accelerated the acceptance of online grocery shopping, a topic we'll return to today. But what we see is even as we've returned to normal, and by normal I mean almost all restaurants and food away from home is back to normal and open, grocery stores have really seen what people are coming into their stores for change. And so from the National Grocers Association, this is a summary of some of that, including they're really investing aggressively in that fresh perimeter. They're seeing more people have turned to online sales for the stuff in the middle of the store that's non-perishable, canned goods, snacks, crackers, cereal. But where people are really coming into their stores is using that outside area of their dairy, their fresh produce, their meat, their bakery, a place where many of our local and regional food businesses can excel in trying to get access to those markets. So it's really changed the dynamics among our retail partners as well, which is why we're going to talk about those a little bit today as well. Next slide. And so this shows in numbers basically that, again, you see the blip there in the most right gray bar that food purchases went down, but that was mostly because of restaurants being closed. Well, as early as 2022, 2023, we saw restaurants completely recover. And what we saw that was interesting, though, is that even accounting for food price inflation, people kept spending more for food at home as well. So what we really find is that people seem to have shifted a larger share of their total budget to food purchases, which, although that might put a strain on food insecure households, is relatively good news for those in the food sector who are trying to secure more sales. We set this up because it's an important dynamic for what we talk about throughout this, which is we're going to keep showing you a lot of growth in sales in food markets. Well, someone who is scrutinizing that might say, not everybody can be a winner. There's not enough pie to share. Well, what we're basically showing with these two slides is that the pie for local and regional foods probably has grown. So there is more pie to share. And so now we're going to turn to our survey results, but we wanted to set the stage a little bit with what was going on in the bigger dynamic of the food sector during that same time. Next slide. So I'll turn it back over to Mackenzie to talk a little bit about some of those dynamics we just mentioned.
Sorry, let me unmute myself. This first slide is showing the percentages of consumers that reported purchasing from a market for the very first time. And we see that almost the majority, so about 47%, did report purchasing from a market for the first time. And of those, around 9% purchased from local and independent restaurants, around 11% from artisan food sellers, around 7% directly from producers, and around 10% from farmers markets. And lastly, around 5% reported buying from a CSA for the very first time. And additionally, in the most recent survey, we again are trying to understand habits in the wake in the current food environment post-pandemic. And so we asked respondents directly how their food purchasing behavior changed since the pandemic began. And they reported that they are now considering their values more often when they're purchasing products. And so they're trying to find products that are aligned with their preferences and values. And they're also trying to find food markets and food retailers that are aligned with their preferences and values. And then lastly, some respondents reported that they are shopping at a higher variety of food markets as well. And so one of these food shopping habits that we really wanted to dive a little bit deeper into was this trend of increased online food shopping. And so we saw that online food shopping was actually increasing before the pandemic, but this was a habit that was greatly exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and has been found to be persisting beyond the pandemic. So a recent industry news article from Supermarket News just last month in November found that online food grocery sales have actually hit a record high just recently. So this is, we wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive. And so now I'm going to talk a bit about our survey findings that emphasize this change. So we asked respondents about their online food shopping, and around 78% that they said that they are not spending a higher budget share of their food on online shopping since the pandemic began, but a substantial amount did report that they are. So around 11% said that they're spending more on curbside pickup, around 7% said that they're spending more on delivery services, and around 4% said that they're spending more on both curbside pickup and delivery. And of those respondents who are using these online tools, they are using delivery services at supercenters, supermarkets, health food stores, and small format grocers at higher rates. At the same time, we see that there has been a decrease in delivery from farmers markets and direct markets since the pandemic began. But we can take a little bit of a deeper look at how consumers are using online shopping tools at local and regional markets to see if there are any insights that we can learn. And so around the majority, around 54% of local and regional market shoppers did report using online options. And of these shoppers, around 24% of respondents did so in 2023 when they did not use these online options in 2022. So this implies that there may be an increase in the numbers of local and regional food shoppers that are using these online tools. And then we also found that curbside pickup seems to be driving the increase in online usage at farmers markets and other direct markets. So this may indicate that these online shoppers are trying to use these options as a way to ensure product availability at these farmers markets. Since we do have, a lot of times there's limited inventory at these farmers markets. So we dived even deeper into this, and we performed what's called a latent class analysis. And I don't have enough time to go into the technical details, but I'm happy to talk about that if there's time afterwards or if there's questions. But we were really interested in this relationship between an increase in online shopping and the consumer's market channel selection decision. And so we looked at this relationship between two classes of consumers that emerged in our data. The first class is this values-driven class that highly values local food, organic food, and that their cultural and traditional preferences are being met by the product availability. And then the second class, frugal consumers who only highly value affordability. And among both of these classes, we see a general positive trend in shopping for food online and selecting more types of food retailers. So that's what we see with this general positive trend here in our graph. And then if we dive deeper and look at how these two classes of consumers are using online tools and where they are using these online tools, we find that the values-driven consumers use these tools to lower their search costs for products, and in other words, to find the niche products that they are looking for more easily. On the other hand, frugal consumers use online much more sparingly, but when they do so, they use it for delivery from discount stores, so to find bargains, and also for curbside pickup from supermarkets and supercenters and wholesale stores in order to save time. So this was pretty interesting to us, and that we did find evidence of different usages of online food shopping options. And so we also just wanted to see if these varied across the USDA Regional Food Business Center regions. And so we looked at some crosstabs here from these regions, which you'll see this slide throughout our presentation as we bring up differences across regions. And so I know there's a lot of information here, and I'm just going to point out a few key takeaways. So first of all, we see that generally there is a higher online shopping usage intensity for the values-driven class compared to the frugal consumers. But we see a few deviations from the average for a few different regions. So first, for the Appalachian and Delta regions, we see that frugal consumers exhibited a higher delivery from full selection stores. And so this is driving a higher level of online shopping for these frugal consumers. They're also using pickup from discount stores more than in other regions. So delivery from full selection and pickup from discount stores for frugal consumers in the Appalachian and Delta region. So different habits there. And then for the island and remote region, we see much lower usages of online tools, and we are hypothesizing that this is due to the higher shipping costs that would be associated to getting food to these regions. And then for the North Central region, which is the Dakotas and Minnesota, we see a much higher usage of online shopping for the values-driven class. And we hypothesize that this is likely due to there being less types of food retailers available for in-person shopping in those food environments in those states. So some interesting deviations here that we plan to look into a little bit further in the future. All right, and with that, I believe I'll hand it back to Jairus for some more insights across regions.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Hi, as just mentioned here, we with the creation of the regional food business centers, we really thought it would be interesting to segment consumers by location and see kind of different ways that people were interacting with local market channels. So we produced reports for each region, which you can find at the link displayed here, where we detail local food expenditure patterns and some information about different consumer types. But before we move into, next slide, please, into the regional analysis, I wanted to present some results that went back to even before COVID. So as mentioned early on in this presentation, we did 3 separate surveys, same questions, generally, just to see, what happened over different time intervals. So the first time interval that we looked at, the first survey was right in the middle of COVID. So we looked at things that consumers were doing in September of 2019, and then what they were doing in September of 2020, when they were really in the midst of COVID that first year. And so then we have 2 other time periods that in the next 2 surveys did, but just for the moment, look at the red bar. That's the pre-COVID to middle of the first year of COVID change in expenditures. And so you can see some pretty obvious trends here. That we had 2 market types that had a lot of declines in spending. That would be restaurants and farmers markets, and that's not that surprising given that we had so many temporary closures of farmers markets and restaurants, while localities, organizations, and states tried to figure out safety protocols for operating. So that first year we see a dramatic decline there in terms of average consumer expenditures, but in every other market channel, for the most part, we did see increases in spending, especially in all the various retail outlets. That would include farmers markets, small format grocery, and specialty markets, and the latter would include things like delis, bakeries, and so on. So in other words, we saw a large consumer shift toward retail markets that first year, and we also see a huge increase in consumer spending on food boxes, which were, I think in the chat, it was explained that it's related to food access programs and whatnot. And it differs from CSA. CSA would be included in the direct from producer sales. So in the next 2 intervals, so that would be the purple and the orange bars there, we see increases across the board at spending in most market channels. And though the rebound in farmers markets was somewhat minimal. And another note is that all of these, the expenditures that we collected, we adjusted for inflation when doing this. So one surprise I see is that the direct from producer spending did not really increase until 2022, 23. And we've, initially when we did this project, we were hearing a lot of stories about consumers buying whole animals, meat directly from farmers, a lot more people getting involved with CSA subscriptions, but at least in our data here, we're not seeing the trends being reflected, at least in this survey. In other places, we have seen those trends, but the main takeaway from this slide, at least, is that since the pandemic, we've been seeing people on average spending more at more market channels compared to before the pandemic. Next slide, please. So while those are somewhat interesting results, we know that geography matters. And here, as you can see on this map here, this is from a publication by Don and some others. And prior to COVID, local farm sales differed by region and level of urbanization. So the blue on the map, that shows sales above farm sales, local farm sales above average, and yellow is below average, national average. So basically what this is saying is that local contingencies shape consumer behavior. So there's a geography to where local markets are, more used, and what types of local markets are being used in different places. So that was another of the motivations for exploring regional changes in consumer behavior following COVID. And so that's what we do with the next few slides. And then you've seen this map already, but again, we use the boundaries of the regional food business centers just to segment our analysis of consumer behaviors. Okay, so just to set this up and what our rationale was, Don earlier mentioned that I believe we saw in that first survey, from before COVID to the middle of the first year of COVID, that 33 or so percent of respondents were saying they were using a local market channel for the very first time. So we're really, as we've gone through this project, we've been really kind of interested to see if that consumer adoption of local markets has persisted, if people are still finding out about local market channels in their area, and so on. So these figures here are looking at the percentage of our survey takers who used these different local market channels. In the pink or red, whatever, however you want to interpret that, those are individuals who are already using the market type prior to 2023. And then the blue section of the bar represents first-time shoppers in 2023. So we're comparing two regions here. Just because it's kind of interesting. We've got the Southeast and the Southwest regions. And here, and this is true across all regions, but restaurants and specialty retail have the largest percentage of overall users. And if you just look at the new shopper percentage of everyone who is using those market channels, that they make up about 20% of the folks using that market channel. So even though there are a lot of people already using restaurants and specialty retail, we see a lot more people, even in the past year, getting into and trying new businesses in that market class. We're seeing more people using food boxes in direct markets in the Southwest compared to the Southeast. But again, for both regions, we're seeing new shoppers in each of those classes representing 30 or 40% of that channel, of people using that channel. And now we're seeing in the next one, we see a similar pattern emerging. So this is Appalachia in the Northwest / Rocky Mountain region. Now the Northwest has a higher overall percentage of shoppers in all market channels, but you see a significant growth in Appalachia. In both regions, about 50% of people who bought directly from farmers, so that's the bar on the left, within that, 50% of the people that have been buying directly from farmers has started doing so in the previous year, so in 2022. New users of food boxes are also a significant portion of shoppers to food boxes, and about a third of the farmers market users were also new to that channel. So, okay, yeah, next slide. I think another way that we decided to measure consumer behavior is by the diversity and intensity of market channel usage. So this is just to explain what I've done here. I've classified individuals by how many different types of market channels they shop at, local market channels, and whether they're doing that before or whether they're new to it. So individuals who shopped at 4 different local market channels in both 2022 and 2023, I've categorized as core local consumers. So in other words, they're consistent users of many different types of local markets. That might be what you might call foodies, or people really committed to buying local. And as Mackenzie had said earlier on, it really, it helps local and regional markets when more people are going to more places. So we're considering that with the core local folks, but also the mid-level local users are really important, because you've got, these are people that have used at least 3 different market channels at some point during either 2022 or 2023. So they have an interest in local food and maybe are just now getting involved in buying from farmers and different local market channels. So they have the potential to become more frequent shoppers and help continue the development of local markets. And then the peripheral local consumers are those who have purchased from 2 or fewer markets in either 2022 or 2023. So even though they are shopping locally less often, and they're a significant portion of sales for certain market channels. So just in comparing these 2 regions, the Northeast and the Midwest, we see the former, the Northeast has a larger percentage of core local consumers, and I think they may be the region with the most overall folks that are using a lot of different market channels. But both regions have a very similar proportion of mid-level local shoppers. So there's a lot of potential for growth in local markets. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see using these same 2 regions, we're basically breaking down the percentage of respondents within each consumer category, that's your core, your mid-level, and your local, the percentage of those folks who are shopping at different local market channels. So if you look at the Midwest, for instance, we've got over 90% of core local consumers, that's your dark red bar. They're visiting farmers markets, specialty retail, and independent restaurants. The Northeast is similar in some ways, but in the farmers markets, we see much lower percentage of overall people within that group shopping at farmers markets. However, the Northeast had more mid-level consumers visiting farmers markets. So again, there could be growth there. But both regions had very similar percentages of core and mid-level folks buying directly from farmers. That's your direct markets on the left there, and that includes CSA. And within the Northeast, nearly the same percentage of core consumers bought from direct markets and farmers markets. So they're similar percentage of people doing that kind of purchasing directly from farmers or from a farmer at a farmer's market. Food box purchasing was larger in the Northeast for core and mid-level consumers, and notably in both regions, peripheral consumers reported no shopping at direct markets or food boxes. Next slide, please. All right, so the next two slides, and then I'll leave you, is I'm doing the same thing but with two different regions. So we've got the Delta and the Rio Grande, and here you can see both regions have more peripheral consumers than the previous two regions, but the mid-level and core local consumers are still a significant portion of all shoppers. And so in the next slide, when we look at market channels, we've got both regions having a relatively high percentage of core consumers going to farmers markets, especially when you compare it to the Northeast in previous slides. Fewer folks, though, are buying directly from farmers in the Delta region. Food box usage is similar to the previous two regions. And again, with the peripheral consumers, here we see people are only shopping at specialty retail and restaurants. They reported no usage of farmers markets, direct markets, or food boxes. So all of these results, really, they're just showing that many consumers are learning about and visiting local market channels still, even in recent years. So maybe COVID had the initial stimulus to seek out these new opportunities, but consumers have continued to diversify their spending patterns. And so while there are some regional patterns and differences, we do see growth across the board. And with that, I will pass it on to Don.
So we give everybody permission to take a deep breath. We understand we're covering a lot. And even with what we're trying to cover, we know we can't cover everything we might want to for every region. This is really meant to be an overview of what we did, the motivation for why we chose to kind of develop the fact sheets that we did. And then we hope this is a good invitation for you all to go peruse these at a little slower speed, but with kind of our voices in your head of how to think about some of the stories. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about not just about market usage now, but what we think is happening with expenditures, and try to end then the webinar with how could you actually use this to maybe frame some interesting stories or guidance for people you're working with, either at the market level or producer level. So again, here we're looking at the actual same region across 2 years, because we do have a little bit of a time series. So actually it should be Delta 2022 and 2023. Sorry about that. They got mislabeled and some reviewing we did. But what you want to look at is the fact that between the right side, which is the year before, and then October 23 last year when we did the survey, there were some pretty significant shifts in how people are spending money. So you really could think about using these expenditure numbers in a couple of ways. First, to look at where you see some dynamics and shifting and changing. And in this case, it's an increase in the money that the average Delta consumer was spending at direct markets or with food boxes. But you also could just look at the most recent year, 2023, and use it as a way to kind of come up with a potential size of market that you're trying to grow your business into. So we welcome you to try either way, and we'll give you a couple of examples of each. But I guess what I really wanted to focus on here and why I circled it is that what we saw happening in this particular region is a real shift of some of the spending into those food box programs, which over in the chat box we're talking about could include CSAs as well, but also direct markets. So again, if you were giving technical assistance in this area, that is an area we would suggest people might want to invest, making new investments. And again, with these new regional food business centers on the ground, this is really timely information for what they might be trying to do with some of the investments they make through those centers. Next slide. Instead of looking at one particular region, here we can put two regions side by side just to say, this is why we need to do these regional breakdowns. These dynamics look very, very different in different parts of our country. So we just talked about that the Delta had seen this real growth in direct markets. That would mean perhaps in that region, some of the best technical advice you could give people or guidance you'd give them or grants you might give them is to grow their ability to reach into those people looking for direct markets, whether they be farm stands or new CSA programs. On the right-hand side, we look at the Northeast, and although they still have very strong direct markets as well, where we really see them being different than the national averages, specialty seem to be very, very common and popular. So that might be a place you want to make more investments in, trying to make those new relationships or connections with independent grocery stores who have seen an influx of new customers and trying to get more local products there. Remember when I started with the conversation today, those stores know that those fresh products are what are the real draw to get people in the stores who otherwise might be online. Having the best fresh fruits and vegetables, having fresh bakery, having unique meat and seafood offerings. So perhaps in the Northeast, that's a bigger focus. So again, all of this is meant to just give you guidance on what in the region you're working in might make sense for you to look at because it's different than what's average. Next slide. So we wanted to spend a little time putting a couple cases together, knowing we couldn't possibly cover the universe of what you might do. We wanted to just start piquing your interest on how you might be able to use these fact sheets for something you're working and supporting in your projects. So again, given that we shared the number and share of your population who is using markets and the expenditures they're making in those markets, you could start coming up with some pretty good estimates of your market share or market size for different marketplaces in your geography. And we'll give you a couple examples of that here in a bit. You could also think about, how do I think about those types of customers Jairus just said? How do we maybe move some of those peripheral or mid-tier customers into being more core customers? Because we think some of that happened already during the COVID era. How might you actually capture some people and pull them into your markets, given we continue to see people trying new marketplaces, and that's shown up in all three of our surveys? And third, what are some of the trade-offs of expanding your local market size? What geography are you currently selling into, and what might you be able to do, whether that be through online sales or going to a wider swath of farmers markets? So now we want to kind of shift gears, and Jayna is going to lead us through a couple of ways to think about how you could maybe characterize some case studies working with your farm, your organization, or the technical assistance you give. So I'll turn it over to Jayna, and we'll again try to help you brainstorm how you might use these fact sheets for your benefit. Go ahead, Jayna.
Yeah, so we use these expenditure surveys to do 2 case studies, which estimate potential market size for different market channels, which can be replicated for any region in the US. So the first case study we did on the Piedmont region in North Carolina. So in this case, for a farm located in Region A, which is the area encircled by the red line in the top figure, if they were to market their produce sold to this region through CSA boxes and farm stands, then they can earn an average income of $16,000 per week, given the number of direct markets in this area. However, if this farm were able to market to the entire Piedmont region, as seen in the bottom figure, they could increase their income by 2.5 times. And some ways of doing this would be through advertising, CSA deliveries, or online sales, just to reach a wider market. And we do have a caveat in this survey, which is that consumers answered their expenditures based on a weekly basis, but we know that with things like farm stands and CSA boxes, and also farmers markets, people aren't able to purchase them every single week, especially during the summertime when people are traveling and things like that. So we imagine that these expenditure numbers could maybe be more practical on a monthly basis, but that's something that just probably depends. And we were also able to estimate the total market share of direct markets in this region, which comes out to about 1% of all money spent on food in the Piedmont region is spent in these direct market channels. And in our next slide, we did a case study on, if you go one back, sorry. A case study on farmers markets in Colorado. So in this scenario, for a farm located in a more rural county like Delta County, they could see a 5-fold increase in sales and a 10-fold increase in consumers that they see if they were to travel to a more populated county like Boulder. These numbers were to increase even further if they were to attend farmers markets in both counties. But of course, this comes with trade-offs such as extra costs for transportation, staffing, and equipment. And also that when you go to a more metropolitan area, there would be more vendors there. So that's something to look into based on the farmers market. Each farmer might be thinking about attending. And we also calculated the total market share of farmers markets in Delta and Boulder counties, which came out to a little under 3% of the total market. And that's all for the case studies.
Thanks, Jayna, for sharing those case studies. And again, those are just a couple of examples we want to give folks about if you're either writing a grant or planning a new investment or giving technical assistance on what's a realistic market growth rate you can maybe do with a business. They're just a way you could use these. But we again realize there's lots of different ways you could think about how to use these. Again, Jairus kind of painted the picture of those core consumers being the greatest potential target market. So that's again what we focus on when we think about market sizes, those people who truly try to get out every week or at least every month and make purchases. So they're by far the safest way to estimate what your market size might be. But again, one of the goals of your technical assistance you're giving to producers you're working with, or your farm or market you directly run, is to think about, is there a way to convert some of those mid-level consumers into core consumers? Is there a way to build loyalty and get people, to shift from being a farmer's market customer to a CSA subscriber? That's another goal there too. So that's why we kind of try to present the whole continuum of type of customers that we might be seeing at markets. We also see that with the online sales data that Mackenzie shared, we think online oddly has been this kind of interesting dynamic. It might feel like it's harder because some of our farms and ranches aren't equipped to actually do online sales. So they might feel like, oh, that's all missed opportunity. Well, the way Mackenzie kind of tries to frame it is that, but if people can buy all the stuff that's easy to buy anyway, like paper towels, cereal and stuff through online sales, it may free them up to go visit more markets. And what we've really seen is a fragmentation where customers are going to more places to buy food. And on average, that's going to help local and regional food markets because we were rarely in the place where we could have the full offering of products a consumer needs. So them shopping more places tends to help us get them visiting the places we have local and regional foods. And then finally, you can use some of this data to kind of build your value case with some of those regions where we saw specialty retailers have really made inroads and gotten more consumers back in their store. Those are the places where generally local and regional foods first can get access, either with their fresh products or with their value-added goods they might be doing. So perhaps going to them and showing there is a relationship between the people coming to your local and regional fresh markets are the same people coming into their stores looking for the fresh offerings they have. And that might open up a conversation with them about why carrying your products might be a win for them as well, because you have this following that's been coming to these direct markets and you can bring them with you into their stores. So those, again, there's about 100 stories you could frame from this data, but we wanted to give you some ways to start thinking about how to use this in your own planning for the organization you're with. Next slide. So with that, our next steps are, please do take this invitation to go visit the Consumer Food Insights part of the project webpage. Download the data for your region, look at it in a far slower pace than we allowed you today. And true that we know you all know your markets better than we do. These are just nice, good starting points for understanding the dynamics of people who are shopping in your region. And then we knew we couldn't get very deep today because we had a little bit of time, and some of you really probably think we nerded out on way too many numbers already. But if there was enough interest, and you can share that in the chat box or however you want to, we could do just specific webinars where all we do is kind of try to do how you would think about sizing your market, using this data to come up with what are realistic estimates of what you could see for market size. No matter what walk of life you come from, you might be a producer writing a grant, you might be a farmer's market trying to figure out how to grow your market size. We're happy to do more of these. We just didn't want to get any deeper today and throw even more numbers on the screen, but we're happy to revisit this, including with our Regional Food Business Center partners. We're very fortunate to host one of those here at Colorado for the Northwest as well. So if this is something you're interested in, we're happy to keep the conversation going. We just knew for today we probably covered as much as people's brains could absorb, and so we wanted to stop with that. So we're going to now turn it over to you guys. After giving you this invitation to visit the webpage and get those, now we can open it up for questions and answers and discussions, and move from the chat box to people. You're more than welcome to unmute and ask your questions live, and we'll try to get caught up on the questions you've already asked that are probably still looming. We did get one question way back I didn't answer, which is about inflation. Besides this project, we've had the fortune to work on a couple projects about food price expenditures. Mackenzie and I are on another paper where we looked at even some counterfactuals about what food prices might have looked at if COVID didn't happen. And again, however we decided to control for inflation, including whether we used the general CPI or we used a food-based CPI, we saw this consistent thing that on average, US Americans are spending a higher share of their total budget on food. Now that gets all pretty dicey pretty quickly, because we also have, unfortunately, a very large food insecurity community. And
Don,
for most of these years, there was some
Sorry.
augmentation to the SNAP programs that allowed people to have a little bit of a safety net to buy their food. We have not gone far enough outside of that period where that SNAP augmentation happened to know if this will continue after food insecure households had that extra bump to their spending power. But that's something we can continue to look at. But again, on average, particularly for higher income households, it looks like the shift was towards more, even adjusting for inflation, more of our budget being spent on food. People seem to have changed their habits.
Thanks for that answer, Don. I just want to really quickly, so that it's on the recording, verbalize the question, which was, given that food price increases were significantly above all items in the consumer price index, does the accounting for inflation account for this above average increase? Do we know if people are buying more food or just spending more for the same food? So just wanted to get that out there. The answer was delightful. Just want to also have the question.
No economic answers are delightful, but I'll take that answer. And the other thing and just from the sheer questions you're asking, we are so excited to have this knowledgeable people on the webinar, because it's clear some of you are working in these circles and you know how to think about how you could slice and dice this data. We're well aware there is some room for interpretation on all of this. This is why we need you to be our ambassadors of this data. You will know what this looks like in your area. You will know how to frame it in a realistic way that matters for the people you're working with, because the whole point of having local and regional food systems is to let things be place-based and let them play out the way a region should have their food systems play out, because we're just a very diverse country. So please take this, and then if you want us to noodle on how to think about something, we'll try to hop on a call with you and do that brainstorming, because we'll learn from you then. But we know we need to put this in your hands now so you can tell the story of what this looks like in your marketplaces. But if there's places we can still do future, Brian already signed up. He might be the only one there with us, that we could do this in a way in the future that's helpful for you. and provides you more guidance, we're happy to, but we'll probably learn as much from you at that point as you learn from us. And feel free to break off as you need to, but are there any other questions people want to ask live?
So I'll go ahead and ask a question, Dawn. I guess maybe coming from the research lens, maybe coming from the food business center lens, but how can producers and grocers collaborate to better meet the evolving needs and preferences that we're seeing come up in the consumer food insights data?
Well, yeah, that's why we featured the National Grocers Association summary they gave, and we want to give kudos to Kansas State, who has this great rural retail food center. We go to the webinars of so we can learn, but we do really believe that the food retail environment has changed. There's no doubt Amazon and Walmart continue to be the big players in the space, and we are honest, the majority of food dollars are still going to flow through those. What I think we want to open up is there's this changing 5 to 10%, depending what you believe, that is going into to more independent markets. And so what we would argue is if people could take some of this information and say, hey, those same people are coming to our farmers markets, our farm stands, subscribing to our CSAs, they're looking for other places they can get our products. And so if you want to compete in the landscape where, you know, a Walmart and an Amazon and Kroger are going to dominate most food sales, but best capture these set of people who are interested in local regional foods, let us be a partner with you because we can drive sales to your market, because sometimes people can't make the Saturday farmers market, or they can't make it to our farm stand by the time we close on an evening. And so if you can start, you know, getting in conversations with them about why you kind of have a shared destiny, and that some of these same folks who are shopping with you, or you could start promoting, well, and if you can't find me at the farmer's market, I'm always going to be at Lucky's Market down the street, who's open way more hours than I'm open. I think that's what we're hoping. That's why we included specialty retailers as one of our categories, is we think those independent retailers are having the same challenges we are, and share a lot of the same target customers that we have. Someone has a question. Kelly has a question about the resiliency playbook. Which one of you from USDA might be best to answer?
We do not currently have it available
But we can put that on a wish
as
list
a
now,
PDF,
so
but
stay
that's
tuned.
something that's in consideration for the future potential. Yes, yes, exactly.
I think we might be wrapping up then. Great questions today. You guys kept us hopping. I want to thank, I guess, my panelists who joined me today and did a lot of this work, Jairus, Jayna, and Mackenzie. And then USDA, you guys have just been the best cooperative partners to allow us to be curious about things, take some questions that were coming through the focus groups we had with market managers and producer groups, and get to the bottom of some questions. We probably still have more questions than we have answers, but I know I've learned a lot working for it. It's probably one of my projects that I know some of the data has been used the most, and we're just happy to see the dynamic happening where there is some people looking to be local consumers more. And thanks for letting us explore that dynamic. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, you all. Can we go to that next slide? Do y'all have it?
I think it's like 3 more down.
And one
One more.
more. Okay,
There you
yeah,
go.
2.
Hi, welcome. Thanks everyone for coming today. My name is Samantha Schaffseld-Dopp. I'm the branch chief for the Outreach and Technical Assistance Division within our local regional foods division, this division is kind of leading this webinar series, but it's mostly our cooperators and the awesome work being done by our university partners and our nonprofit partners that are the focus of this. And so next month, we keep on that same theme, highlighting a cooperative research agreement that we recently completed with Cornell Small Farms Program in Rooted, Wisconsin, to develop and publish courses for growers and planners on urban agriculture. They're really awesome courses that highlight case studies of different urban farms. There's a grower's perspective and a planner's perspective, And we're going to have members of both the growers team and the planners team coming in January to present some of the work there and give you more of an insight into the stories that are told there, the resources that are available. And it's especially timely because these are free currently through Cornell Small Farm Program on their Teachable website. I can put links in the chat until January 31st. So as long as you're enrolled by January 31st, you will have free access to all of the materials ongoing. It's just enrollment by the 31st. So suggestion to get on there, enroll, even if you don't have time now, get free access. And so we'll be talking about that in January, and I'll put some links in the chat for you to sign up now. Thanks, everyone. Brittany.
All right, again, a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists and our tech support Danielle on the USDA side. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded, so you'll receive an email of the recording and some summary notes in the next few days. Check out our webinar page to view past webinars and recordings and see what's upcoming. Thanks everyone for joining, and see you all next time. Goodbye.